All right, proving ground number 1. Here are some past examples. There are 3 components that are needed, each worth half a point. The first is combining your creature and your landscape in a believable way. And the way that's going to be measured in the rubric is whether the angle of the anatomy of your creature matches its setting and whether the lighting matches your setting. Right. The second requirement is that you're going to need, once you're finished with your Creaturescape image, your creature has to be at least 25% of the overall image, which means it's not a Where's Waldo project, right? It's not hide your creature in the setting. It needs to be prominently featured. It is the character. It is the main actor on the stage. But sometimes that means you have to crop down your landscape to feature something that makes sense for your character. So even if your landscape is 12 inches by 16 inches at 300 pixels per inch or 350 pixels per inch, right? When you crop it down to work with your creature, where your creature takes up at least 25% of it, it might be smaller. So when you're done with your Creaturescape, you need to know what its physical inches are and what its resolution is without growing your pixels, right? This is what the pixels are of your assets. And then you need to identify it as either being good enough for print resolution, like this one is because it's larger than 8 by 10 by 300, or whether it's large enough for only screen resolution, which is 72 pixels per inch. The third component is you need to look at your creature in its environment, and then you need to write about how it is able to live in that environment. Right? You have to make an argument for those connections. And in creature design, this is kind of the pitch. This is understanding why this is a good idea. Right? And you did these things separate from each other. And it's okay if they don't naturally match. In fact, it's better because you get to be creative in saying how they do. How one thing can live in a weird place. So we have lots of past examples that do this with crazy creatures in crazy environments at different sizes and resolutions. And all of these meet all the requirements as long as all 3 are present. Right? So, and we can find lots more examples and lots more tutorials at these links. So this proving ground is called, in general, identifying patterns. It's the first step of creative problem solving. You need to know what you're working with, right? Before you can come up with solutions. So everything in this proving ground is about interrogating things that already exist and then creating value based on that interrogation. So the directions. We are going to use our compositing skills that we've been building to believably place our fantasy creatures from assignment 2 with a clean-edged PNG that has no background to it. So if I go to assignment 2, I want a clean-edged PNG, which in preview has a gray background, but here has a white background because it has no background, right? It will take whatever background it's placed on. So it shouldn't be a JPEG, it should be a PNG. And it should be as clean as possible. If the internal edges are not great yet, right, then you can work on that as part of this proving ground and then use that to improve your assignment 2 submission. But it should not look like this, right? It needs to be cleanly cut out with no background. So we're going to use that. So how do we use it? Because we're going to leave assignment 2 completely alone. We're going to hold down Option and drag that PNG to our desktop. And when you hold down Option and drag one file from one place to another place, it makes a duplicate of it. You'll see a big green plus sign. Okay, now we're going to go to, this is collecting our assets. We're going to go to assignment 1. And I have finished off assignment 2, so I'm going to mark that green. And now I'm going to assignment 1, and I'm going to find my PSD, my fantasy background, assignment 1, but I want multiple layers for that, foreground, middle ground, and background. So I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to drag that onto the desktop. So for those of you who don't yet have a clean assignment 2, that's your priority. You got to do that first with some urgency before you can do the proving ground. All right. Now that I've copied both of these onto the desktop, I'm going to do this. I'm going to click on my PSD, which is a duplicate of my assignment 1, and I'm going to hit return to rename it. And instead of assignment 1, this is proving ground number 1. Now this is our freeware section, right? We've been doing all our compositing with PhotoP, but it seems that PhotoP is down today, which has actually never happened during a class period for me. And I've been using it for about 10 years. So historically, it's been a pretty reliable freeware program, but not today, right? But luckily, that is not our only option in this lab. So we are going to continue by, once we've renamed this, we are going to make a new folder in our master folder that is called Proving Ground number 1. And I like to mark, when I'm working on something, I mark it with a yellow light, right? So all of these are finished. Now I'm on to this project. Proving Ground number 1 is empty right now, so I'm going to bring my assets on. My setting asset from assignment 1, the PSD, and then my merged and cut out transparent online asset from assignment 2, which is the clean PNG creature. So we're talking about 3 different digital formats. PSD is what's called a working format. It stands for Photoshop document. It supports a lot of layers, but you can't post it online, and it takes up a ton of memory. PNG is an online format. It merges all of your layers, but it supports transparency. And then JPEG is the format that assignment 1 was submitted as, right? Because a JPEG is an online format that compresses all of your layers, but it has to fill up a rectangle. So we need all 3 for this. All right. Now that we have those, and we have them in our Proving Ground number 1 folder, and I can't use PhotoP. Usually I would just open PhotoP and then drag the PSD into it, right? We are simply going to double click on the PSD. And because PSD stands for Photoshop document, it will automatically open up in Adobe Photoshop. And we've made sure all of you have access to Photoshop. And then when you are working on this on your own before next class, I'm hoping that PhotoP will be working, right? So you can. But remember, the goal of studio classes is to do as much of the work as you can in class. So now, what are we looking at? So this is my duplicate of assignment 1. Check that it is named differently than assignment 1, because you don't want to accidentally overwrite assignment 1. Now we have to make sense of this data. That's our first requirement. And the one thing we have to remind ourselves of is these layers. And if there are any layers that are not turned on, like this sketch layer, I'm going to unlock it and I'm going to delete it. Like this rock layer, I was thinking maybe of using it. Actually, I do kind of like it. Maybe I'm going to keep it. And maybe I'll quickly use it. So what do I need to do to be able to use this rock layer? I don't think I need this one though. Well, I can adjust its colors and things, but so I'll just really quickly play with its levels because I haven't done this. Levels, color balance. I think I ran out of time. But this is a nice immediate foreground element. So I'm just going to make it a little bit darker in levels. And in its color balance, I'm going to make it a little bit cooler in the midtones. This is just like what we did in Photop, except the menus look a little different, right? So you see all of the things that were in the browser in Photop are now all up here in Photoshop. You have image, you have edit. We can transform, and we're doing image adjustments. So image adjustments, levels, color balance, hue saturation. So hue saturation, do I want the intensity to be a little bit higher? Maybe a bit. Do I want to shift its spectrum? Not particularly. And now that I've made it kind of intense, I'm realizing I want to go back to levels again, and I want to limit its shadows. But that's just the rock. There we go. So that's looking a little better. Okay. Now, scroll through, see if there are any other layers that aren't doing anything, right? So interrogate your layers. Understand what each of them is doing. And think of it like a stage play. You're required to have at least 5, but you might have more than that. I know I have more than that. And there might be little things that need to be improved. Because we never have all the time in the world for these projects, right? So if I'm looking at it, I see this transition is pretty sloppy. So I might use what I've learned about compositing and use my soft eraser at 100% opacity. And I can blend this edge a little bit better of where the mountains meet the fields here by getting rid of that hard edge first. And then taking down the opacity. And transitioning it. And taking down the opacity some more and blending it in. And it looks like there's some parts I can just get rid of entirely. Oh no, that's all one asset. Interesting. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Okay, so, or I might want to burn it down a little bit. I'll just burn it down a little bit. I'm trying not to get too particular. But I'm going to burn the midtones with the burn tool of just that layer asset. There we go. And then I see on this layer asset, there's a little halo. So I'm going to find that one. It's in the foreground. There it is. And I'm going to use my lasso, just like we were with the creature, at a 2-pixel feather. And I'm just going to trim it. Oh, I see why. Okay, so I'm going to use my magic wand, select it all. Just to get that little halo. And then I'm just going to burn just that selection. Burn the highlight. Just to knock it down a little bit. Because it's actually in the photograph. That's what's called a simultaneous contrast effect. That can happen in photographs, but I don't love it. All right, there we go. So that's cleaner. Okay. Now, how else can I understand my landscape before I bring my creature in? Well, there are these layers which I don't need, of my sketch and of the gray background, which was the desktop, right? So I'm going to delete both of those, and now everything else is working. But there are some really picky layers. So I have my background layer, that's a big deal. Working from the background forward. But then there's all these layers of the palace in the sky, right? So what I can do is I can merge layers that should be merged. So all of these the mountain and then the little palace layers on